let's set the scene. The year is 451 AD. Attila the Hun, a man they called the Scourge of God, is tearing his way through Gaul. To stop him, the Roman General Aetius pulls together a massive, last-ditch coalition. What happens next is one of the most famous and, as we're about to see, one of the most misunderstood battles in all of history. The Battle of the Catalaunian Plains. And this is the story we're always told, right? You get quotes like this one from the historian John Julius Norwich, claiming that the entire fate of civilization was at stake. It's pitched as this epic showdown, a final stand for the Roman world against a barbarian horde. But, well, that's the myth. And you can see how that myth got cemented in images like this. This is from 1,000 years later, and it looks pretty epic, doesn't it? A grand clash of heroic knights in shining armor. It's a really powerful image, but the reality on the ground was so much more complicated, and frankly, a whole lot messier. So, that brings us to the big question we're tackling today. Was this battle really the world-saving event that everyone claims it was? We're going to peel back the layers of this famous legend, piece by piece, and see what the evidence actually tells us. Okay, first things first, we have to get our heads around the world Attila was actually invading. Because the Western Roman Empire in 450 AD, well, it wasn't the powerhouse you might be thinking of. It was fragile, it was a patchwork, and it was pretty much struggling to hold itself together. I mean, just look at Gaul. Roman control there was shaky at best. The whole province was filled with Germanic peoples, the Visigoths, the Burgundians, who were technically Roman allies. They were called foederati. But these weren't loyal subjects, they were restless, ambitious, and always looking out for themselves. The whole place was a tinderbox just waiting for a spark. And Attila was more than happy to provide that spark. But his invasion wasn't just a random raid for loot. No, he was a shrewd political operator. He had multiple excuses lined up. You have the emperor's own sister, Honoria, sending Attila her ring, which he cleverly interpreted as a marriage proposal and a claim to half the empire. Then he got an invitation to jump into a Frankish civil war, and on top of that, the Vandal king literally asked him to attack the Visigoths. Attila was a master opportunist, and the chessboard was wide open for him. So yeah, this was never ever just Romans versus Huns. Just look at this lineup. Aetius's Roman coalition had Visigoths, Franks, Alans, you name it. And Attila's army was just as much of a mix, made up of peoples he'd conquered, like Goths and Gepids. This wasn't a clear-cut showdown. It was a chaotic free-for-all where alliances were flimsy and loyalties were, let's say, flexible. All right, so with all the players on the board, let's track the campaign itself and see how this massive collision actually happened. Attila crosses the Rhine and just goes on a rampage. He sacks cities like Metz and drives deep into Gaul, heading straight for the city of Orleanum, what we now call Orleans. His plan seems to be to just shatter Roman power in the region before Aetius can even get his army in the field. But here's the first huge crack in the legend. A lot of modern historians will tell you that the real turning point of this whole war wasn't the big, famous battle at all. It was right here, at the Siege of Orleans. The city managed to hold out just long enough for Aetius and his coalition to show up. Attila was forced to give up the siege and start pulling back. So, his campaign's main objective had already failed. So, that great battle that everyone remembers, it actually happened while Attila was already retreating. Aetius caught up to his army, and the two forces finally squared off on the Catalaunian Plains. This diagram gives you a sense of just how complex it was, with these two huge, multi-ethnic armies maneuvering for position. The battle itself was just incredibly chaotic and brutal. First, there's a mad dash for a ridge that overlooks the whole field. A race the Roman coalition wins. In the fight that follows, the Visigothic King Theodoric is killed. We don't even know for sure how. Maybe trampled, maybe a spear. But this just enrages his men. They charge, and they actually manage to push Attila's forces all the way back, cornering the Hunnic king himself inside his fortified camp of wagons. By nightfall, Attila is surrounded. And this is where the story gets really weird. Attila is trapped. His army is beaten up. The victory seems complete. So why on earth would the Roman general, Aetius, just let him get away? Well, the answer seems to be buried in the absolute mess of the aftermath, where the historical record gets incredibly confusing. It's almost like nobody at the time was really sure who had won. You can see the legend-making start almost immediately. One writer from the time, Aetius, claimed 300,000 men were killed. Now, that number is almost certainly a crazy exaggeration, but it tells you how people saw the battle, as this huge, almost apocalyptic event. And when you compare the sources, it gets even murkier. A century later, a historian named Jordanus writes this heroic story of a glorious, decisive victory. But a contemporary, a guy named Prosper, is way more cautious. He basically says, it appears the Huns were defeated. And why? Because they lost their taste for fighting and turned back home. That doesn't exactly sound like a civilization-saving triumph, does it? Which finally brings us back to Aetius's strange decision. He was playing a very dangerous game of 5th century chess. He knew that if he completely destroyed the Huns, his Visigothic allies would suddenly become the most powerful force in Gaul, and a superpowered Visigothic kingdom could be a way bigger threat to Rome than a weakened Attila. So to keep the balance of power, he told the Visigoths, hey, your king is dead, you should go home and secure the throne, and in doing so, he let Attila just slip away. So, if the battle didn't really save civilization, what was its actual legacy? What did it really change after all the dust settled? This gets into something historians call macro-historical importance. It's kind of a fancy term, but all it really asks is, was this one of those rare events that genuinely changed the long-term direction of history? And for centuries, people have been arguing about it. You have the traditional view from the 19th century, heralding it as this great victory for Christian Europe over pagan savages. But then you have the more modern take from historians like J.B. Bury, who argued its importance was enormously exaggerated and that, as we saw, the real decider was the Siege of Orleans. Today, the consensus is that the battle was basically a strategic stalemate. It was so unbelievably bloody that it ended up crippling everybody. The Romans, the Visigoths, and the Huns all limped away much, much weaker, and this created a massive power vacuum in Gaul, which, ironically, is what paved the way for the rise of the next big power in the region, the Franks. Which kind of leaves us with one last big thought. The Battle of the Catalaunian Plains was a brutal, bloody, and pretty inconclusive fight that weakened everyone who took part, and yet it became one of history's greatest legends. It really makes you wonder, what if the most important battles in history aren't the ones that are the most decisive, but just the ones that make for the best stories?